What is good, homies? This is Chris from the Small Hat Crew, doing a solo video today. This is an idea I've had for a little bit, and essentially what we're going to be doing today is talking about why you should play blue. To elaborate, this is more so a retrospective over the history of blue in the card game. We're going to be talking about multiple different things like the strengths and weaknesses of the color. This is also going to be a mini-series. I'm going to do this for all of the colors. I'm starting with blue. Initially, I was going to start with red. I feel like that would have probably caused a lot of backlash. Because, you know, people do get tired of red at some point. I wanted to do the colors in the, order that they are in the card game, and it is red first, then it's green, then it's blue. But I feel like blue would be a nice color to start with. That's nice and neutral. Nobody has any toxic feelings toward blue. If you do, that's weird, I'm gonna be honest with you, because blue's never really done anything all that crazy. But we'll go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm gonna go over each set in, the order they released in, all the cards that they've gained over time in order. Okay, so let's just go ahead and we'll start with the structure. Okay, so our very first introduction to blue in the One Piece card game is with Mono Crocodile as a leader. He is a very meta leader today. He's very competent, very good, but this was not always the case. In the beginning, Crocodile was considered a meme. He had nothing to do with blue whatsoever. The only semblance of blue in him was that in his leader ability, for some reason, he minuses Dawn. That's really random. Didn't really have anything to do with blue. He is, to this day, blue's only minus Dawn cost in the entirety of the TCG. But he would bounce a card. And that was also a problem initially, because when I said blue had some of the worst removal in the game, this was it. Blue has the best removal in the card game. Now, this wasn't always the case. The blueprint has always kind of been there since OP01, but it really took Bandai a really long time to really lean into it. Now that they have blue is a competent color, and it has the best removal by far. Before, blue had some of the worst removal in the game, if not the worst removal. Back in the day, One Piece isn't even, not even a year old here in America yet. But essentially, with blue, you would have to spend Dawn you would be taking a card out of your hand, you'd be investing Dawn into it, to take a problem off the board and put it back in the hand. So you didn't permanently deal with the issue. All you did was set it back a turn. You would delay it, so you knew it was coming back, and hopefully you would just be able to overcome that problem, build a board that would make them not want to put the threat on the board again. But when it came to certain things, that just was not enough, especially when it came to competent players, because they would just play around it. It was very rough. The biggest problem, so I guess looking back at the structure, so here we see in the very beginning, we had one cost law blocker. That is one of the strengths of blue. You do gain access to a one cost blocker. In the current climate of One Piece, that's not all that relevant. Moving forward, once you have a leader like Yamato in the game, it probably will be. It's always nice to have access to a one cost blocker. It also means that blue always has for the most part, they usually have a turn one play. So we start out with a blocker. We got our 7 cost Dofi. This is our first introduction to the Pacifista engine, where this is some of blue's color identity here. They generate advantage. With a card like Sentomaru, you could cheat Pacifistas out of the deck. The Pacifistas will float into each other from the hand and whatnot. They just try to maintain a board presence. They try to do it without playing cards from your hand. That way they can maintain hand advantage and grind you down. Leaning into card advantage, there are cards also like Love Beam. I have no idea why this card doesn't have a trigger. To this day, it still baffles me. This card should have had a trigger. But it was a 4K counter and it drew a card, so it would replace itself if you were playing on a lower hand size. And now we actually get into, I guess, the real introduction of blue to the card game. Because, there was the structure, but the game was never really legal until we had started OP01. So now we lean into things like we have 3 new leaders. We have Doflamingo, Blurple Crocodile, and Blurple Kaido. Oh, this was rough. This was a really rough start for blue. So we had a leader like Doflamingo. He was exceptional. He would cheat cards off the top of the deck. He would do 7k swings, so he'd pull cards out of the opponent's hand, and then he would establish a body, essentially for 1 Dawn. He would just stick it on the board, and he made it so, again, you would never have to play out of your hand. You would just keep cheating bodies off the top of the deck. Problem with Doflamingo, as good as he was never really able to achieve anything on a large scale because blue had one very glaring weakness, one inherent flaw. The best color in the game at this point was green. Newer players might be surprised to hear that, since we've been in a red meta for 3 sets straight, and red has always been a very good color. Even in OPO1 it was a really good color. But it was green because of a card called 8-Drop Kid. This card was the only floodgate in One Piece. To this day, it's still the only floodgate in One Piece. I'm not sure what happened here. And he just would cheat a card out of the hand, and while he had a Don attached to him, your opponent could not interact with you or your board. At this point in the game, most things had to die by combat. Removal wasn't that efficient unless you were playing red. So if you didn't have a way to remove something through a card effect, you would just lose to 8-Drop Kid. It was very degenerate, it was very toxic, it was so unhealthy for the card game. And it's great that we were able to move past a card like that existing, because my god, it was just peak degeneracy. God, I don't know how green players would play that card and just feel good about themselves. It was so degenerate. He would just hide behind blockers. And blue, because blue's removal was bouncing, and it capped out at 7 cost. They could never interact with it. They had 7 cost Dofi, they had 9 cost Mihawk. Both cards only interacted with a 7. Not to mention blue doesn't have rush, like like red, for example. So, because their removal can't interact with 8-Drop Kid, because they don't have any way to cheat out additional swings for the turn, if Kid Blocker was on the other board, and they had just like 2 blockers, even 2, because when Kid came out, he would cheat one out of the hand. If there were even 2 blockers on the board, blue could not touch Dofi. Blue could not touch 8-Drop Kid, so he was considered the win button against blue. If you put him on the board, you would win the game, and there was nothing they could do about it. It was incredibly toxic. OPO1 also, like I mentioned, introduced leaders like Blurple Kaido, Blurple Crocodile. These leaders were not good. They did not do anything. I'm a Blurple Croc simp. Biggest Blurple Croc believer ever. Well, I wouldn't say believer, but lover, enjoyer. But no, my boy was not. He was niche. There was a period where he won a case tournament, I think in a PPG event, and it really built up the hype for him. It's what put him on the map. But he never really, he didn't really do anything aside from skyrocket all the prices and like leak the buyouts on TCG player. Yeah, he didn't really accomplish much or anything, honestly. As much as I love that leader, he never did anything. And then Blurple Kaido was more of the same, except this leader somehow did even less. This leader was so high roll. This leader did absolutely nothing. And this was in the beginning where blue was considered to be a color that was a detriment. If you were a dual leader and you had access to blue, outside of Blurple Crocodile, because he could take advantage of events to draw off of them, if you had access to blue, it was a detriment because the color did nothing for you. The blue color pool was really weak. It didn't do anything. It had the worst removal. There is almost nothing that came out of having access to blue. So a deck like Blurple Kaido, for the most part, wouldn't really play any blue cards outside of 2Ks, maybe Love Beam. If they're feeling frisky, maybe even a 9-cost Mihawk. But that was blue for a good majority of this game's history. We had a 2K like Alvida. She had some kind of utility. People tried to be cheeky with her. It wasn't really ever like the best thing you could be doing. It was very underwhelming. They had a blocker in 3-cost Doflamingo. That blocker is amazing to this day. That is one of the strengths of blue. Blue has blockers that have utility. They don't just stick a blocker on the board. The blocker usually does something else. So we have blockers like 3-cost Doflamingo who let you stack the top of the deck. That was good for setting up the future plays on our leader like Doflamingo, for example, so you could cheat them off the deck. Because blue has so much draw, it would let you stack cards on top of the deck and then draw them off like Love Beam or a Boa blocker, who is another blocker that gave blue more utility on a blocker. She was a 5-cost body, she could swing into the lead for no extra investment, and if your hand was small enough, whether she blocked or attacked, she would draw a card. This is more of what we're seeing with blue and generating card advantage. Just draw slapped onto random cards. Moving on to OPO2, so at this point we've acknowledged blue has strengths, but it also has a glaring weakness, and that is 8-cost characters. They can't interact with anything 8-cost or higher. What would Bandai do to help blue rectify this issue? Come OPO2, nothing actually. they would do quite literally nothing. So we introduced 2 new leaders. We have Ivankov and we have Sanji. If you are a blue player, oh, this was not what you wanted to see. If you were so not only did Sanji come out with no support, they didn't do anything for that leader. I think they gave him 1 event, but it didn't make Sanji a viable strategy. And then they introduced another leader like Ivankov. So this is where blue starts to run into its first of many issues. At this point, blue's whole thing was stacking the top of the deck, cheating cards off the top, and then Ivankov came out, and he had nothing to do with any of that. He just took blue's strategy and he pivoted in an entirely different direction. He was like, I don't give a fuck about any of what blue's doing over here. I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm going to look at blue's entire identity of generating advantage. I'm gonna toss that out the window. I don't care about that. We're gonna destroy the foundation and we're gonna start all over. I don't want to have a hand. I want to dump all the cards out of my hand, which is counterintuitive to what blue wants to be doing. And then I'm also going to randomly be playing 7k bodies. One of them has double attack for some reason. I have nothing to do with blue at all. So this was a set that did nothing for previously existing blue leaders. This did nothing. It introduced a new engine that can be considered very high roll, and it really requires you to see a lot of the right cards at the right time. Impel down engine. You want to see Ivankov. If you see Ivankov, you want to see him with other cards. If you don't see him with other cards, then he's a brick in your hand. If the cards show up at the wrong times, then you have pieces that don't do anything. You're maybe doing mediocre Ivankov plays. It was not what you want to be doing. Ivankov kind of popped off in the beginning of OPO2. He quickly fell off. It did not last very long whatsoever, and he was ultimately finally designated as like the gimmick that he was from day one. Many people were able to recognize that. Some people were not, bought into it, and quickly came to realize Ivankov is not what you need to be doing, and he was a mid-tier leader at best. And then there was Sanji. We'll just move on. So, alright, so this set introduces new cards like 1-cost Dofi. This was a card that was experimented with. He stacks the top 3. He interacts with 1-cost blockers. He has no counter. People experimented with him. He was quickly dropped. It also introduced removal in the form of Brickfist. It is a neg 1. It doesn't permanently deal with the issue. It has a restriction to what it can bounce up to. This card was experimented with. It was quickly dropped. And then it also introduced 2 cards, Moji and Kabaji. These are 2 cards that at this point, people didn't really know the issues that these 2 cards would come to create in the future. That is the entire of OPO2. So you see, they've done nothing to rectify the 8-cost issue, and that this is just where blue is at this point. So it's safe to say, if blue wasn't a top tier color in OPO1, they were even further from it in OPO2. Because all the other colors are getting stronger, their color pools are growing, blue's is not. We move on to OPO3. OPO3 introduces a new leader in Nami. So this is more of the same of what I mentioned before, where blue really struggles to find its identity because Bandai is introducing new leaders and cards that have nothing, they don't synergize with the previous leaders whatsoever. Nami is now playing, just like Ivankov said, screw all the other blue stuff, I want to do my own thing. Nami quite literally said, I want to do my own thing with myself. I don't even want to interact with the opponent. She just went ahead and flipped One Piece on its head and introduced a new win condition. She just wants to deck herself out. This was obviously very toxic, very degenerate, and it was going to have to be addressed at some point because solitaire is just never good. It is never healthy. An ability as generic as end the game when you deck yourself out, it'll break anything that just draws cards. So we are seeing that for the first time in a card like Alti. Amazing card. Blue would have loved this card if Nami didn't exist. Because she does, she's restricted the dual cost leaders. So Nami's existence is actually a detriment to blue because moving forward, Bandai will always have to design cards with Nami in mind, unless they ever decide to just ban her. So a lot of Blue's strongest cards moving forward, if it has to do with card draw, they're gonna have some kind of restriction on them. If there's ever a point in the game where you are trying to limit the interaction between you and the opponent in a 2-player card game, that's going to be seen as toxic, and it was. So Bandai had to address this. So realistically, they introduced a ban list to to deal with a leader like Whitebeard, who would go on to rule this game. For the longest time, he was introduced in OPO2. He's what dominated OPO2. He's still dominating in OPO3. The players are begging for them to do something about this leader to stop his dominance. They introduced a new ban list. It doesn't stop his dominance. But there is a surprising card stuck on this list in Kabaji. I thought it would have been really funny if they had actually put if they had put Moji on the list, if they put the vanilla, because it would effectively do the same thing. It would also mean, though, because as it is right now, so and it was the right call that they made, because if they ever print another Moji, we run into the same issue once again. But because another Moji doesn't exist, I think that they should have stuck the vanilla on the ban list, because I think that would have just been funny. They just have new players would look at the list and be like, why is this here? But we are in OPO3. Nami is degenerate. She doesn't care about any of the issues. And again, Blue's issue at this point is still that they cannot interact with 8 cost and higher characters. OPO3 does nothing once again to rectify. OPO3 introduces a new 2K. So OPO2 didn't even introduce a 2K with utility that Blue could play around with. Every 2K that was introduced in OPO2 was nothing more than a 2K. Come OPO3, we now have Kaya. Kaya is a really good 2K. You just put her on the board, cycle your deck for 2 cards, draw 2, trash 2. Then we have Sanji's Peel-Off. Also not really doing much of anything at this point outside of being degenerate and Nami. Moving forward though, this card will be seen in, if a deck has access to Blue, they're probably playing some Sanji's Peel-Off. Maybe even just for the trigger. Maybe they don't expect to hit it. And then we have 3000 Worlds. So this is the very first time that One Piece is finally acknowledging the blueprint that 9-cost Mihawk laid down from OPO1. In the beginning, Mihawk was the best removal that this game had. He would not destroy, so he got around things like Miss All Sunday, for example. Anything that wanted to be destroyed to trigger, Mihawk would disregard that entirely. Also, a new color was introduced in OPO2, and that was black. Black couldn't be destroyed by card effects. This was a permanent way. Blue finally had a way to remove cards from the field permanently without bouncing. It's exactly what they needed, to a degree. So now we have a good card in 3000 Worlds, but Blue's problem is they cannot interact with the 8 cost and higher characters, so this does nothing to help their problem there. It was nice. It was a really good card to add to the Blue color pool, but it did nothing for Blue as a color. So at this point in time, Blue is finally meta, but for all of the wrong reasons. It has nothing to do with Blue as a color, it just has to do with Nami playing Solitaire. And as soon as she's hit on the list, that is quickly dealt with. So now we move into OPO4. At this point, Blue's problem is still they cannot interact with 8 cost and higher characters. Bandai finally acknowledges this. So, before we get into that, our new leaders are Vivi and Queen. Vivi was Blue finally gaining access to the red color pool. High hopes. Much cope. To this day, I still believe Vivi will do something in this game's history. But at the time of recording, Vivi has done nothing. So if you are a Blue player, this is you getting kicked while you're down. You've gained another leader, and the leader just is not meta relevant. She isn't viable. And then we also gain Queen. Blue gains access to the yellow color pool for the first time, and it's actually good. It's actually a reliable. It has good matchups into other meta decks, like Rebecca, for example. And it's abusing cards that are finally addressing Blue's issue. So Blue's issue is they couldn't interact with 8 and higher. We finally get a card in Red Rock. For 6 Dawn, you can bottom deck anything. So not only is it the best removal in the game, we've gone back to bottom decking. It hits anything. There is no limit on what it can touch. You pretty much give up your entire turn, You don't establish anything on the board, but you deal with a threat, you just take it off the board. This is what blue has been needing. For the first time, once this card is introduced, blue as a color is competitive. I mean blue mechanically, because you could argue that Nami was blue's first meta relevancy, but that was Nami's strategy. That was Nami doing her own thing. She didn't really care about blue as a color. She just cared about trying to deck herself out. This is the first time where blue being played as intended is finally good. A leader like Mono Crocodile is finally seen play. He's achieving things on a large scale. He's getting tops at large scale events. And then Queen. Again, with blue's problem being that they couldn't interact with 8 cost and higher, being introduced to the yellow card pool with Queen now gave them access to 8 cost Katakuri. So we are finally at the point where blue is able to deal with their problems. They will no longer lose to a card like 8-drop Kid. This was very good for them. And then also it just put them on the map. It made cards like Mono Croc so much better because you now have events like 3000 Worlds and Red Rock where you can bottom deck one problem on the board and then -4 Dawn from what you just spent to deal with another problem. So at this point, blue can now control the board in a way, because the events that did it were relatively expensive, so Croc would give you a way to take advantage of that. You would now be able to deal with 2 problems for the cost of either 4 or 6 Dawn. At that point, that's good. Blue introduces new cards also at this point. Again, 8 cost and higher characters can now be interacted with because we gain access to 10-drop Kaido. Not only does he bounce an 8 cost character on the opponent's board, you could bounce your little things on your board, like a Kaya, for example, to abuse it again. And that's a good chunk of all Kaya was in Nami. Nami players will have you believe that they were piloting Law. They really will. They will talk about that leader as if she was not the most brain dead thing ever. They will really try to sell you on this fantasy that their leader was big brain, and that there's a lot of when ultimately it was just overheating Kaya back to your hand, zeffing Kaya back, like you just bounce Kaya repeatedly. Anyway, tangent aside, we have a leader we gain a character like Kaido, that's letting you recycle bodies on your board. You get your Peronas back, whatever your little body you have, or maybe even a little blocker on the opponent's board, and you're dealing with what blue has struggled with to this point. We've already discussed Red Rock. We also get an event in Dragon Twister. One of blue's issues is getting beaten down by leaders like Zoro, because sometimes it's just too fast and blue's just not fast enough to deal with that. I've heard arguments from the other side. Regardless, a card like Dragon Twister would nip that in the bud. It would essentially stop one attack, and then it would remove a body that Zoro was dealing with. And again, we've gone back to bottom decking. Amazing. So at this point, blue finally has realized its win condition and what it wants to be doing. Blue is, at this point in the card game, blue is control, and nobody controls like blue. It is control. It is the best removal. It's establishing the biggest bodies. And that's essentially it. That's where we are at the time of recording. You may notice in OP04, there was a leader that had access to blue that I did not touch on. That is Rebecca. And that is because Rebecca was primarily a black deck. Every single Rebecca deck that has topped on average, they played 1 blue card, a playset of 1 blue card. It was maybe a Kaya, a 3000 Worlds, or a Red Rock. You would choose your blue card, and every other card in the deck would be black. So realistically, we would really address Rebecca in the black video, not in the blue video, because she was a black deck at the end of the day. She was Dressrosa deck, and Dressrosa is just a black archetype. But yeah, that is blue at this time of recording. Blue has had its ups and downs, a lot more downs than ups, but once they finally found their footing, they are a very competent color, and they have the best removal in the game. They have some of the best bodies to establish in the game. They're generating advantage. They're amazing at control. No other color does it better. Their blockers have always been dual purpose. They're setting up their future plays. It's no longer seen as a liability. Now, in the beginning, it was that blue was, if you were a dual leader, you did not want access to blue. Now it's arguably maybe even the best dual color to lean into because it gives you the best removal in the game. But that's just essentially it. The next color I'm going to tackle is going to be red. Very competitive color. Amazing history in this card game's history. But that is it for today. If you've enjoyed what we've seen today, if you like this, give me feedback. Be in the comment section, interacting, like the video. Do something so that I know that this is not a waste of time, because I just want to do it again. I'm gonna be so honest. Like, oh my god, the amount of editing that goes into this, if it's not worth it, I just won't do it. So, if you do like it, let me know. Otherwise, with that being said, until next time, I'll see you guys.